on this Saturday night on high alert.
What we went through and that another family is having to go through that again, it's horrific.
The safety of British politicians being questioned as the killing of another MP is treated as terrorism. Plus, crisis in Iqaluit.
The surgeons and the scrub nurses would be washing their hands with contaminated water.
The impact of high concentrations of fuel in the city's latest water crisis.
People who are consuming cannabis as medicine are going in and relying on these labels.
The dangers of Canada's cannabis mislabeling and why it's happening. And NASA's Lucy spacecraft launches on a quest to study some of the solar system's most fascinating rocks.
Global National with Robin Gill. Reporting tonight, Neetu Garcha.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. We begin tonight in Britain, where police have declared the killing of Conservative MP David Amess a terrorist incident. Tonight, residents gathered for a candlelight vigil in the village of Leonsea, where Amess was viciously stabbed yesterday multiple times. The area now a crime scene and the site of a growing memorial in tribute to the long-serving politician. A 25-year-old suspect is in custody. The community is in shock. Jennifer Johnson has our top story tonight.
At the church where British lawmaker David Amess was killed, leaders from across the political spectrum gathered to pay their respects. The 69-year-old Conservative member of Parliament was stabbed multiple times while meeting with local voters.
The investigation is in its very early stages and is being led by officers from the Specialist Counter-Terrorism Command.
Police arrested a 25-year-old British man at the scene and recovered a knife. The motive and if Amess was specifically targeted is still under investigation. Searches are being conducted at 2 London addresses. Many locals laid flowers at the church Saturday for the popular politician and father of 5 who had served in Parliament for nearly 40 years.
When my son didn't know what to do and how to go forward, he went to David and David helped him get into the police, and I just felt that I needed to come and just pay my respects.
Prime Minister Boris Johnson says the entire country is heart-stricken.
The reason I think people are so shocked and saddened is, above all, he was one of the kindest, nicest, most gentle people in politics.
Amess's death has reopened questions about the security of British Parliament members. It comes 5 years after Labour Party lawmaker Jo Cox was shot and stabbed by a far-right extremist on a street before meeting with her constituents.
The shock and the feelings for us as a family, obviously as to what we went through and that another family is having to go through that again, it's horrific.
The British Interior Minister convened emergency security meetings hours after the fatal stabbing.
I've been with the Speaker of the House and with the police and our security services to make sure that all measures are being put in place for the security of MPs so that they can carry on with their duties.
British lawmakers are generally not provided armed security outside of Parliament. But after this second killing of a politician in 5 years, many say that has to change. Jennifer Johnson, Global News, Washington.
To the situation in Iqaluit now. Tests have turned up a high concentration of fuel in a tank that supplies water. It's the third major water emergency for the city in just the past 4 years, and another instance of the drinking water issues that are an everyday reality for many of Canada's Inuit and Indigenous communities. Let's bring in now Nunavut's Chief Public Health Officer, Dr. Michael Patterson. Dr. Patterson, thank you so much for joining us. So first of all, what impact is this lack of clean tap water in the city having on hospitals and the overall healthcare system?
For the most part, the healthcare system is functioning, and there has been no need for admissions for anyone who's been ingesting this water. But when we discovered that there was contamination with hydrocarbons, the decision was made to limit surgery to only those that absolutely needed to be done and could not be done elsewhere.
And based on the testing done so far, how much of the city's water supply has been contaminated?
Right now, we expect that some of this fuel has gotten into the entire system. The highest concentration and the levels that were the most concerning and dangerous were confined solely to that one well. The level of contaminant dropped with each step through the process. And that is probably what has kept us from having more severe impacts at this point.
Having said that, Dr. Patterson, we did hear from some residents who said they weren't feeling well after having consumed that water before they were told not to. What kind of symptoms have those who drank the water been reporting?
We've heard of people experiencing headaches, nausea, some vomiting, and maybe some diarrhea.
And who is most at risk of having any health impacts from this contaminated water, especially given that we're in the midst of a pandemic?
The biggest risk is always for those who are already vulnerable. Newborns and infants and elderly would be at the highest risk of severe problems from contaminants like this.
Have you ever seen anything like this before in your community?
No, this is the first time I've ever been involved with any kind of oil or fuel being in a municipal water system.
All right, we'll be in touch. We'll leave it there for now. Dr. Michael Patterson, Nunavut's Chief Public Health Officer, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Vaccinated Canadians waiting to travel to the U.S. are feeling some relief now that a date has been set for land border crossings and a green light given to those with mixed doses. Still, many are wondering what took so long and whether it's a signal relations between our two countries may not be so rosy. Couteur reports.
While in Washington this week, the Deputy Prime Minister's focus was mainly on meetings with fellow finance ministers of the G20, including U.S. Secretary of Treasury Janet Yellen. The pandemic has prevented some of these in-person meetings, but it shone a light on how much that relationship needs attention.
Work needs to be done every single day, every single hour on the Canada-U.S. relationship.
It comes as the U.S. announced it was loosening travel restrictions on both its northern and southern borders at the same time. Something Canadian business leaders worry is a sign we've lost our friendly footing in the White House.
We're being treated equally to the Mexican border. Come on. The borders are not treated equal. They're not created equally. Our rate of vaccination is significantly better.
Hyder says there are a number of other irritants Canada continues to deal with, like defending the Line 5 pipeline, lobbying against the Buy America plan, and one other big issue.
We don't have an ambassador. We haven't had an ambassador for over 2 years now. You know, I mean, this is supposed to be such a critical relationship.
Canada hasn't had a permanent U.S. ambassador since 2019, and President Joe Biden's nominee, David Cohen, is being held up in Congress. On the other hand, some believe in the post-Donald Trump presidency, Canada may have gotten complacent.
So Biden gets elected and there's this sigh of relief. Oh, good. So you take your foot off the gas. You know what happens when you take your foot off the gas? Like if you're in a Formula One race, you take your foot off the gas, everybody zooms by you.
Canada made massive efforts during the last free trade negotiations, but those efforts tailed off once the deal was in place. To re-engage, Greenwood says Canada should step up in areas the U.S. could need help, like global vaccine efforts and the resettlement of Afghan refugees.
To the extent that Canada leans in to help solve some of the global challenges, it gives Canada a bigger calling card on some of the bilateral issues.
And it could give Canada a starting point as the government looks to reestablish its warm relationship with a longtime ally and friend. Couteur, Global News, Ottawa.
Canadians have been waiting months for some kind of national vaccine passport to make travel easier. Tonight, the public safety minister says he's confident something will be in place by the time U.S. land borders reopen on November 8th. Abigail Beeman is hosting the West Block this week. Abigail, what did Bill Blair tell you?
Neetu, people have been waiting a long time for a national vaccine passport. Bill Blair says they're still working with provinces which hold the data to make it happen, but he thinks it will be done in a matter of weeks. So I asked him whether that will be in time for the U.S. land border reopening November 8th.
I always think it's important to overperform and under promise, but at the same time, I'm very confident that work has been progressing very, very well, and that we will have in place for a number of Canadian travelers that certificate by that date. But there's still some other contingencies that need to be addressed. We're working through them as quickly as possible.
I also asked Blair about the messaging around whether now is the time to travel and about the question of travel for nearly 4 million Canadians who got a mixed dose of the vaccine. You can watch the full interview Sunday on the West Block. Neetu?
Thanks, Abigail. Sunday marks 3 years since Canada legalized cannabis. That lit up an industry that's now worth $4 billion a year. Sales may be high, but the standards for cannabis labeling are too low for one Nova Scotia scientist. He studies plant DNA and says something doesn't smell right. Ross Lord explains.
After studying the DNA of cannabis plants down to their smallest molecules, Sean Miles has come to a troubling conclusion about how different strains are marketed to Canadians.
There's not much difference.
For example, products whose dominant strain is advertised as either sativa or indica, each strain supposedly producing a different psychoactive effect.
It is frequently the case that something that is labeled sativa is still more closely related chemically to something that's labeled as indica than it is to anything else that's labeled sativa, right? Which means that overall, it's a poor predictor of anything and not very useful.
Miles says for some cannabis consumers, it's a big deal.
People who are consuming cannabis as medicine are going in and relying on these labels of indica and sativa as a kind of proxy for the medicinal content of that plant. And we've demonstrated that it's not a good predictor of those elements. And so that's particularly dangerous.
So why, after 3 years of sales licensed by the federal government, would legal cannabis still be mislabeled? The group that represents more than 700 licensed growers in Canada suggests it's a lingering effect from the illegal cannabis market.
License holders were able to bring, on a one-time basis, bring plants over from the illicit world where perhaps the naming and such was was more of a trend and less of a scientific matter.
The Cannabis Council insists products are tested rigorously before they go to market, but it admits inaccurate labeling of different strains is still a problem. Health Canada says it's providing more information for industry to ensure packaging and labeling give consumers the information they need. Ross Lord, Global News, Wolfville, Nova Scotia.
Coming up, Kiwis roll up their sleeves in record numbers for New Zealand's televised vaccine drive. And the World Health Organization's latest push to understand the origins of COVID-19.
Yeah, this definitely helped sway my decision, yeah.
At least 2.5% of the population of New Zealand was vaccinated in just 1 day today. Nearly 130,000 Kiwis rolling up their sleeves for a nationally televised Super Saturday Vaxathon. New Zealand had stayed largely virus-free until a Delta outbreak in mid-August and is now racing to catch up on vaccinations. More than 24 scientists from around the world will lead a new panel at the World Health Organization tasked with better understanding how novel pathogens like COVID-19 start and spread. The WHO says this effort could be the last chance to find the origin of this pandemic. Reggie Cicchini explains.
For nearly 2 years, there's been one question that scientists have struggled to answer. What caused the COVID-19 virus to infect humans and shut down the world?
I would ask everyone, countries, journalists, and everybody else, to create a little space for that discussion to happen.
The World Health Organization attempted to uncover COVID-19's origins earlier this year, sending scientists to China for a month. But Beijing was accused of meddling in the fact-finding, so a new advisory panel is being put together to focus not only on COVID, but all problematic pathogens.
The emergence of new viruses with the potential to spark epidemics and pandemics is a fact of nature.
700 scientists applied to be on the panel, with 26 chosen from backgrounds that include biosecurity and lab safety, a way to look into long-push theories over a leak from a Chinese lab.
Every one of us stares at this and knows the reality. The reality of this came from Wuhan.
The WHO claimed human error was unlikely early on, but Beijing's secrecy has kept the theory simmering, and the UN agency's director has called for further research. This group will work to balance all theories.
This is our best chance, and it may be our last chance to understand the origins of this virus in a collegiate, collective, and mutually responsible way.
If there has ever been a moment to be thinking about how to prevent pandemics before they start and do it on a global scale with global cooperation and collaboration, the moment is now.
The Advisory Commission's ultimate goal is to keep science front and center, creating a clear path to identifying future diseases too. Meetings will be confidential to cut out political noise. However, one obstacle to overcome: it can't compel countries to participate.
We need the cooperation of that member state to carry out any future missions.
But without a global effort, work can grind to a halt, and disease experts say the clock is ticking. Viral outbreaks are common, and tracing origins is a monumental task.
Reconstructing events after the fact is always much more difficult, and the further away you get from that event, the harder it is to collect the data.
Now, attempting to tie up loose threads on a virus that's still so unknown, opportunity arises to learn from past mistakes. Reggie Cicchini, Global News, Washington.
Do big cities still mean bigger earnings? Ahead, why more Canadians are cashing out of that belief. There is a long-held belief that living in bigger cities like Toronto or Vancouver could mean access to higher wages. But recent research by a Canadian Nobel laureate suggests the two don't necessarily go hand in hand, especially when you factor in skyrocketing housing prices. And as Anne Gaviola explains, it's prompting more workers to go rural.
Dave Battersby grew up in a small town, and he always knew he wanted to go back. And when COVID hit, he and his family moved from Toronto to Cobourg.
It was extremely scary to pick up and move during the pandemic.
A hybrid work arrangement means he makes the hour-and-a-half-long commute to Toronto twice a week. He says small-town life hasn't dented his earnings, but his living costs are lower, and they're in a much bigger home, mortgage-free.
We only had about 1,000 square feet there, and when we moved to about 5,000 square feet. The home we moved to has a pool. The kids have been enjoying it every day since we've moved here throughout the summer months.
Findings released this week by researchers at the University of California at Berkeley examined U.S. data between 2010 and 2018. It found that the high cost of housing in big cities erodes the advantage of a bigger salary, meaning you may benefit from more and better amenities in an urban center, but you're typically not getting further ahead financially.
Along comes a pandemic and this hard shift to working remotely. Businesses like mine just transformed overnight, and our staff that had always come into the office were working from home.
The exodus from downtown cores began about 5 years ago as more people moved from expensive urban centers to the suburbs and rural areas. With COVID giving rise to flexible and hybrid work models, Royal LePage highlights a big pickup in people moving from Ontario to the Atlantic provinces during the pandemic, as well as a migration from the lower mainland to northern BC and parts of Alberta, including Calgary.
It's hard to find good people. And if you find the worker you want that is not close to where your office is, you're going to be pretty flexible about letting them work with you.
Despite rumblings this summer about some big tech firms in the U.S. like Facebook and Google reducing pay for workers who live in less expensive cities, economist Linda Nazareth says that won't fly in this tight labor market. In an email to Global News, Google Canada says outside the U.S., each country has a single compensation category, so there are no differences in pay whether you're a fully remote or in-office employee. Battersby says there are trade-offs living in a smaller community, but they're worth it.
Couldn't be happier about our decision to move. It has really changed the lifestyle for our family.
Anne Gaviola, Global News, Toronto.
Next, an Alberta writer's big break in a blockbuster gaming franchise.
Three, two, 1, 0.
NASA blasted off on a 12-year mission to explore Jupiter's Trojan asteroids. These space rocks are believed to be fossils of the first planets. So NASA named the mission Lucy, after a famed collection of fossils here on Earth. That discovery got its name from the Beatles song, Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. NASA sent Lucy soaring with some lab-made diamonds, and one of the Beatles had a special send-off as well.
A little noisy, but I'm so excited. Lucy is going back in the sky with diamonds. Johnny will love that. Anyway, if you meet anyone up there, Lucy, give them peace and love from me.
Well, you don't need to be into video games to know the name Call of Duty, one of the biggest franchises in the industry. Well, its action-packed latest entry will be in the hands of players next month. But one Edmonton woman already plays a key part in its storyline. Morgan Black has more on the budding designer's big break.
Sometimes the only way to honor a fallen soldier is to finish the mission.
As a kid, Shelby Carlton spent hours in this world. Now she's creating its next chapter.
To get to work on a seminal game in my life now is just, it's pretty crazy.
In her Edmonton home office, Carlton has been writing the storyline for a bestseller in the world of video games, Call of Duty.
Wade was the most dangerous thing in the skies.
After working on some indie titles, she applied to Sledgehammer Games, a company that's worked on the series in past. Carlton was hired as a narrative designer. In March, she began work on the title.
I was very excited.
She says there's much more beneath the surface of the first-player shooter game.
I like to think of games now as empathy machines, as these things which can allow you to step into a story and experience something that you may not have experienced otherwise.
She knows with a heavy-hitting franchise comes pressure. The team worked with historians and other experts to help shape the narrative. Carlton helped shape another storyline too. Her team was equal parts men and women.
That should be how it is everywhere, and I hope that as much as I can be an example, that our team can be an example, and that our studio can be an example for the wider industry.
She says creating her own story is even more exciting than the game she worked on. Morgan Black, Global News.
And that is Global National for this Saturday night. I'm Neetu Garcha. Tonight, your Canada is Canmore, Alberta. The mountains pictured here are called Three Sisters. We would love to see your corner of the country, so please keep sending your photos to viewers@globalnational.com. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you back here tomorrow. Have a great night.